They forgot you. After everything. After every scar you earned in their name. That's the punchline, isn't it? The sick joke. The comedy hidden in your tragedy. You bled, and they blinked. You stayed, and they strayed. You gave your soul dressed as loyalty, and they traded it for convenience. You held space for their chaos, while they made you a placeholder. You, the one who bent without breaking, the one who loved without limits. You smiled through pain just so they could feel peace. You swallowed your truth to protect their illusion, and they called it weakness. That's the joke. You poured oceans into their droughts. They left you thirsty. You were thunder. They wanted background noise. They made you question your worth, made you wonder if loving that deep was the curse. But let me tell you, it wasn't you. You were the truth, raw, unfiltered, unapologetic, and the world chokes on truth. They say they want real. They don't. They want comfortable lies. They want dopamine, not depth. Validation, not vulnerability. You offered devotion. They preferred distractions. You gave meaning. They wanted noise. But here's the part they won't say. You were never convenient. You were a mirror. And mirrors expose everything they try to hide. You were too much? No. You were exactly what they pretended to want, until it arrived. And then they panicked. Too much presence, too much love, too much of a reminder of who they weren't ready to become. You saw through them. You saw their cracks. You handed them grace instead of judgment. And they mistook that for weakness. Because it's easier to ghost a mirror than to face the emptiness it reflects. So they turned you into the villain. They twisted the story to make silence look mutual. They replaced you, not because you were forgettable, but because you were too unforgettable, too loud inside their hollow world. They buried your name under fake laughs, pretended your love never mattered, rewrote history like your hands didn't pull them out of their own graves. But guilt? It's clever. It never dies. It just hides in their tired eyes, in their delayed smiles, in the silence that follows when someone mentions you. You were never forgotten. You were suppressed, because remembering you hurts. You became the ache they silence with noise, the ghost that lingers behind every shallow high, the echo in every "I'm fine" they fake. But listen carefully. Your worth was never based on being remembered. Your silence was never defeat. Your silence was earned, was sacred, was loud, because you were a storm. And now that you're gone, every part of their life trembles where your presence once stood. They forgot you? No. They fear the day they remember. You weren't too little. You were too real, too loyal. In a world trending betrayal, too deep. For people drowning in their own shallowness, too loud. For hearts used to silence. They didn't reject you because you lacked something. They ran because you reflected everything they hid. You were a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You showed them their wounds. You showed them the hollowness. You made them feel seen, and that terrified them. Because when a real one walks in, masks crack. You didn't play roles. You didn't fake peace. You didn't smile just to survive. You showed up as you. No filters, no edits. And that's the thing. They wanted filters, not faces. They wanted fantasy, not fire. You gave them love that burned through the fog, and they screamed it was too much because it touched nerves they weren't ready to feel. You reminded them of every lie they told themselves, every version they pretended to be. You didn't just walk into their life. You shook its foundation. And so, they called you intense, emotional, clingy, difficult. But they never called you fake. They never called you empty. They never called you hollow, because you weren't. You were substance in a world built on surface. You were truth in a culture of distraction. And truth hurts. They didn't leave you because you were wrong. They left because you were right. Too right. Your loyalty made them feel like thieves. Your love made their selfishness scream. Your presence, it was a confrontation they never asked for. You walked in like clarity, and they ran like chaos. Because clarity shows you who you've been avoiding. You asked for nothing fake. You didn't want attention. You wanted connection. You didn't want a moment. You wanted meaning. But that's not trending. Not today. Today's world claps for actors, applauds detachment, celebrates silence over substance. And you weren't built for performance. You were built for presence, built for impact, built for truth that lingers. You weren't a phase. You were the standard, the one they'll search for in every empty echo, the one they'll remember when cheap love feels colder than being alone. You didn't fail. You exposed. You didn't lose. You revealed. You weren't a mistake. You were the mirror. And cowards, they destroy mirrors, not because they're broken, but because they reveal what is. They'll keep telling the world you were too much. Let them. Because deep down, they know you were everything they pretended they wanted. And when the masks fall, when the hype fades, when they're left alone with the parts of themselves they can't love, they'll remember the mirror they shattered, the truth they ran from, the real one they couldn't keep. And that reflection, it doesn't go away. It haunts. They didn't forget you. They buried you. They ghosted your name, replaced your presence with noise, louder laughs, brighter posts, parties soaked in distraction. But none of it was healing. It was hiding, a performance for the world, a desperate scream in disguise, because silence reminds them of you. They erased your photos, but not your impact. They deleted the messages, but not the memory. You live in the gaps, the pauses, the fading smiles, the "I'm fine" said too fast. You were a storm. Now, your absence feels like an earthquake. Everything shifted the moment you left. They just don't talk about it, because talking about it means admitting it. And they'd rather drown in noise than face what they destroyed. They laughed louder after you. But laughter isn't healing. It's hiding. It's the sound of people who can't sit with their own guilt. You see, you were the gravity. You held it all together. Now that you're gone, they float, directionless, weightless, meaningless. They didn't move on. They escaped. There's a difference. People don't move on from real. They run from it. They paint over truth with glitter and call it healing. But cracks don't disappear. They wait. They wait for quiet, for stillness, for the music to stop so the echo can whisper again. You mattered. You weren't noise. You were substance. And that's what makes them uncomfortable now. Because every shallow connection feels emptier. Every fake, "How are you?" feels colder. Every new person reminds them of what they lost. They search for you in people who don't care, in conversations that don't listen, in hands that don't hold the way you did. You weren't just comfort. You were home. But they mistook safety for softness, treated your loyalty like background noise. And now they're surrounded by noise, but none of it sounds like you. Now they wear smiles that don't reach their eyes, post photos that don't quiet the ache, laugh louder to silence the scream beneath it all. And when night falls, when their world quiets, when the fake fades, you return. Not as a text, not as a call, but as a ghost that hurts to remember. You became the guilt they can't shake, the standard they'll never match, the voice they silenced too soon. And still, they'll never say your name. Too much pride, too much fear, too much truth. So they'll pretend you never existed. But the truth, they carry you in every silence that follows a fake connection, in every pause before answering, "Are you happy?" You were the real, the root, the rare, and they just weren't ready. Your presence was a storm, but your absence, that was the earthquake. It didn't just shake them, it shattered them, silently, completely. You walked away, and the whole room changed. The energy, the mood, the balance. They didn't notice at first. They laughed louder, posted harder, pretended better. But slowly, they felt it. The shift. The space you used to fill now swallowed them whole. You were the anchor. They just didn't know until the ship started drifting. Your silence echoed, not like a whisper, but like a siren in the back of their mind. Every time they reached for comfort, they remembered the hands that no longer held them. They didn't expect it. They thought you'd stay, thought you'd wait, thought you'd come crawling back. But you didn't. You vanished without a scene. No goodbye, no closure, just gone. And that silence, it screamed. It bled through their peace. It danced in their dreams. They replayed your name like a ghost story told in the dark. Because when someone who gave everything disappears, it creates damage. Not the kind you see, but the kind that sits in the chest. That tightens when they hear your favorite song. That stings when someone asks, "Why'd they leave?" They'll say nothing happened. They'll lie with a smile. But behind that grin is a truth they can't face. You mattered more than they admitted. They walked like they were free, but their steps were shaking. Because your absence unlocked the weight they thought they'd buried. They try to replace you, but it never fits. New people, new faces, same hollow. Because no one else brings silence like yours. No one else forces them to sit with what they broke. You were thunder. Now you're the aftershock they carry into every room. They thought removing you would bring peace. But peace doesn't come after breaking something real. It comes after accountability. And that, they've never tasted. So now they dance in the ruins of what they destroyed. Laughing to keep from crying. Faking joy to drown the grief. And while they scroll through chaos, you rise in silence. You rebuild, with no need for noise. Because you were never noise, you were meaning. And your absence, it carved a scar they'll hide from the world, but never escape. You gave everything, and when you took it back, the ground beneath them cracked. That's not revenge, that's truth. You were real, and that was the curse. You didn't play games, didn't wear masks, didn't switch up depending on the crowd. You showed up with your heart in your hands, no armor, no agenda, just love, just presence, just truth. And that's why they ran. Not because you were wrong, but because you were rare. You cried for them, fought for them, held them together when they were falling apart. And when it was your turn to break, they looked away. That's betrayal. Not in screams, not in arguments, but in absence. In the silence that answered your pain. In the stillness of people who claimed they'd never leave but disappeared when it mattered most. You gave, and gave, and gave, and they took like it was owed, like your loyalty was cheap, like your love was disposable. You thought it was strength, to stay kind, to stay soft, to stay loyal. But this world, it feeds on soft hearts and spits out bones. You loved with no scorecard, no calculations. You believed love meant something, but they saw it as a resource. They didn't see the weight you carried, didn't see how many pieces you broke yourself into just to make sure they felt whole. You went without so they could feel full. And when you needed the same grace, they vanished. You were the real one. But the real one always bleeds first, always loses first, always walks away alone. Because being real means being vulnerable, being open, being seen. And most people, they can't handle that. They want fantasy, not foundation. Attention, not attachment. You were the cure in a world addicted to poison. And when you didn't play pretend, you made them feel small. Not because you shamed them, but because you reminded them of everything they weren't. That's the curse of being real. You trigger people who don't want to grow. You threaten comfort zones. You force people to confront their own emptiness. So they call you names. Too intense, too much, too emotional. But the truth? You were just too alive for a world that's half dead inside. They used your silence against you. Said you didn't care. Said you moved on. But your silence wasn't apathy. It was grief. It was rebuilding. It was you picking up pieces they never cared they shattered. You weren't cold. You were tired. You weren't cruel. You were done. And when you rise, it won't be to chase them. It'll be to outgrow them, to outlast, to outshine. Because real ones don't come back to prove their worth. They become the lesson, the storm, the silence they never forget. And they'll hear you in every moment they feel alone. In every soul they push away, in every what if that echoes through their regrets. You were the warmth they didn't know how to hold, and now they're shivering beside someone who'll never understand them like you did. That's the curse of being real. They only value you after you're gone. They thought silence meant surrender, that your quiet meant defeat, that your distance meant you didn't care. But they were wrong. So wrong. Because while they were out there, posting smiles, faking peace, performing for the crowd, you were in the dark, becoming something deadly, not broken, not bitter, just sharpening. See, real warriors, they don't rise on stages. They rise in silence, in shadows, in the void where no one claps. You weren't hiding. You were building. You weren't weak. You were healing, with your teeth clenched, your soul bleeding, your heart learning how to beat without being held. That's what they never understood. Your silence wasn't absence. It was transformation. While they scrolled through illusions, you faced every demon, alone, without a single hand reaching back. You cried without an audience. You suffered without applause. You rebuilt without validation. And that's where power lives. Not in noise, but in self-respect. Not in rage, but in restraint. You didn't post revenge. You became it. Quietly. Completely. They thought you were stuck. They thought you were broken. But they forgot. Some people don't yell when they're in pain. They sharpen. You were once soft. Now you're stone. You were once light. Now you're fire. The kind that doesn't ask. It consumes. And when you return, you won't knock. You won't explain. You won't beg. You'll arrive unshaken, untouchable, unforgiving, and they'll feel it. In every place you no longer go. In every version of you they no longer recognize. They'll call you cold. They'll call you distant. But what they'll never call you again is weak. You were forged in nights no one saw. In grief, no one comforted. In doubts, no one helped silence. You weren't rebuilt by love. You were reforged by pain. And that kind of transformation, it doesn't wear a smile. It wears scars. It walks like thunder. It doesn't ask for space. It becomes the storm. So let them pretend you disappeared. Let them believe you faded. You're not gone. You're just different now. Stronger, darker, quieter, but louder than you've ever been. Because now, you don't speak to be heard. You exist to be felt. And they'll feel you in their regrets, in their silence, in the mirror they can't look into anymore. You were the soft place to fall. Now you're the ground that shakes beneath their feet. They thought your silence was weakness. They'll learn it was your weapon, because the loudest storms are born in the quiet. Let them pretend. Let them rewrite the story. Let them wear fake crowns built on your silence. They think they won, that you're gone, forgotten, replaced. Good. Let them believe that. Because what comes next, it's not revenge. It's evolution. You don't grow to get them back. You don't rise to make them regret. You rise because staying small was killing you. They tried to shrink you, box you in, mute your roar, so they could stay comfortable. But now, you're no longer fitting in cages. You're building kingdoms. And they're still pretending you never mattered. Let them drown in their delusions. Let them sip poison and call it peace. Let them post fake love and call it healing. Because when the lights go off, when the followers stop liking, when the music fades, your absence will scream louder than your presence ever did. You were their shelter. You were the stillness in the storm, the one who stayed when everyone else left. And now, they dance in the rain, pretending they don't miss the warmth you carried in your silence. Let them sit in the ruins of what they broke. Let them fake joy while their soul whispers your name in the quiet. You're not here to be remembered. You're here to remember yourself, to give everything you once gave away back to yourself. No more begging, no more proving, no more shrinking just to fit into places that never saw your worth. They mistook your loyalty for need, your kindness for weakness. Now let them feel the weight of your boundaries. Let them wonder why the door never opens again, why the energy you once gave no longer belongs to them. Because this time, you're not healing to reopen wounds. You're healing to close the chapter, for good. You're not the rehab for people who destroy. You're not the light for those who curse the sun. You are a fortress now, unshaken, unbothered, unreachable. And if they try to come back, let them knock, let them wait, let them hear the echo of your peace. You don't owe them a damn thing. Not a message, not a memory, not even closure. Because real growth doesn't scream, it vanishes. Real strength doesn't chase, it walks away. And what you built in silence, they'll never understand. You gave everything. They gambled with it. Now let them pay the price of losing access to what they thought would always be there. Let them choke on the silence they once ignored. Let them drown in their delusions. Because you're not swimming back. You were the fire, and they chose smoke. They had the real thing, wild, warm, alive. And they traded it for flickers, for sparks that never stayed lit. You were heat in a world addicted to cold. You were presence they never knew how to hold. You gave them something rare, consistency, depth, a flame that didn't burn to destroy, but to protect. But they didn't want real. They wanted a performance, something shiny, something safe. And you were never safe. You were never small. You were the danger they secretly craved, but publicly denied. Because fire, it exposes. It burns through the lies. And they were never ready to be that honest. So they ran. Not away from you, but away from their own reflection in your flame. They didn't move on. They moved sideways, into empty conversations, into plastic smiles, into shallow bodies that never felt like home. And still, they search for warmth, for depth, for something that makes them feel the way you did. But they'll never find it, because you weren't built in pieces. You were the whole fire. And they only wanted the light, never the heat. They called you too much, too intense, too emotional. But here's the truth. You were the original. They shattered it looking for copies. They thought they'd find better. They won't, because better doesn't come with half the soul. You didn't love for show. You didn't stay for status. You didn't give to be thanked. You gave because it's who you are. And that's what haunts them now. The way you stayed, the way you listened, the way your silence never judged. They'll remember the love they called too much when everything around them feels too empty. They'll feel your fire in the coldest nights. They'll hear your name in the spaces they used to feel safe in. But you're done. You don't return to ashes. You don't beg to be reignited. You were the fire, and they chose smoke. Let them suffocate in it. Let them pretend it's warm. Because when it all fades, when the illusion crumbles, they'll look for you, and you'll be gone. Not bitter, not cruel, just unavailable. Because your love now comes with gates, with standards, with awareness. You don't burn to keep others warm anymore. You burn to keep yourself alive. They played with the flame. Now let them live with the cold. Let them sit beside shadows and wonder why it never feels real again. You gave them the fire, and they chose smoke. That was their decision. Now let it be their curse. What broke you, built you, piece by piece, scar by scar, lie by lie. You didn't rise despite the pain. You rose because of it. Every betrayal, a blueprint. Every silence, a chisel. Every "I don't need you," a spark. They thought they ended you, but all they did was force the fire deeper. You bled for them, cried for them, collapsed under the weight of your own loyalty. And they watched, unmoved, unbothered, silent. That's what broke you. Not the storm, but the silence. The way they didn't flinch when you shattered in slow motion. But that's also where it started, where the transformation began. Because you didn't stay broken, you rebuilt. You didn't just survive, you evolved. The softness they took for granted, dead. The forgiveness they weaponized, buried. You no longer love without boundaries. No longer stay just to prove you're worthy. They made you question your worth. And now, your worth is untouchable. They made you doubt your heart. And now it beats with fire instead of hope. What they meant to destroy became the reason you dominate. You're no longer trying to fix others. You're focused on fortifying yourself. You don't chase closure. You create distance. You don't beg for honesty. You speak your truth and let it cut. Because now you understand. Loyalty to the wrong people is self-destruction. You're not here to be chosen. You're here to choose. You're not here to prove your love. You're here to protect your peace. And if that means walking away from everything familiar, so be it. If that means burning bridges just to build boundaries, light the match. You gave until it hurt. Now you give with precision. You showed up without limits. Now you stay only when it's mutual. You poured into empty hands. Now you recognize the takers before they even speak. You've seen what it costs to love blindly, and you'll never pay that price again. Because now, you've changed. Not out of bitterness, not out of hate, but out of awakening. You don't cry for the ones who watched you drown. You rise for the one who pulled you out, yourself. You were never weak. You were never a fool. You just believed that love meant staying, even when it was killing you. But now, you know, sometimes healing means leaving. Sometimes peace requires silence. Sometimes love starts with no. And what they broke, it didn't vanish. It hardened. It sharpened. It stood back up with fire in its bones and no apology on its tongue. You gave everything. They forgot. But you remembered. And that memory, that pain, that's what built you. You're not coming back the same. You're not coming back to explain. You're coming back as the version they never saw coming. Unbothered, unbreakable, unapologetic. You're not angry anymore, not broken, not begging, just quiet. And that silence, it's not surrender, it's power. Because now, you burn. Not loud, not wild, but quiet and bright. The kind of fire that doesn't flicker for attention. it simply consumes. They thought your glow came from them, that your warmth was borrowed, but you were always the source, always the light, always the fuel. They just never noticed until it was gone. Now they scroll, they lurk, they wonder, not out of love, out of loss, out of fear, out of the sinking realization that the best version of you wasn't a phase, it was a gift, and they discarded it like noise. But you stopped explaining, stopped performing, stopped trying to fit into rooms that shrank you. Now you move in silence, with grace, with control, with fire in your chest and peace in your eyes. You no longer react, you observe. You no longer chase, you choose. And when they come back, and they always do, with their "I've changed," their nostalgia, their half-baked apologies, you don't open the door, you don't answer, you don't explain your absence to those who never questioned your presence. Let them hear the echo of your distance. Let them feel what they gave you. The ghost of your loyalty, the silence of your soul, the absence of your light. You don't owe them healing. You don't owe them clarity. You owe yourself everything because you gave it all once and they forgot. Now you give to yourself fully, ruthlessly, sacredly. You're not returning to who you were, that version of you. The one who waited, the one who gave endlessly, he's gone, buried in the ashes of your own rebirth. What remains now is forged in storm, armored in self-worth, and untouchable. You walk different now, not heavier, cleaner, no baggage, no desperation, just direction. And they'll call you cold. They'll say you changed. They'll say you forgot them, but the truth is, you remembered you, and that's what makes you dangerous now. You're not seeking permission to be powerful. You already are. No more waiting, no more hoping they'll understand, no more watering dead things and calling it loyalty. You gave everything. They gambled it. Now you rise, not to be seen, but to be felt, and they'll feel you in their stillness, in their regrets, in every place you once lit with love that now feels colder than ever. You don't need to scream. You don't need revenge. You don't need them to look back, because now you burn quiet, you burn bright, and you never go out.